This thing on. Hi everyone, and welcome to the last live stream of 2020 here at Grain&Grape. Well, I say live, but not exactly. We experienced a number of technical issues during today's stream. As you can see, we're filming in a slightly different location than what we normally do. We're out here in the warehouse, and it turns out the Wi-Fi signal wasn't as strong as we'd hoped. So the stream was choppy and eventually cut out on us. So that's why the live stream isn't on the channel at the moment. For those of you who did watch the live stream, you put up with a lot, and thank you very much for doing so. But nonetheless, Helen and I did manage to record everything to tape. So what you are watching right now is the live, not live stream recorded to tape that doesn't have all the technical crap going on. So without further ado, I'm going to get out of the way, and I'm going to splice in the footage of Helen doing a great job doing her stream about brewing beers for winter in summer. Enjoy.
Anyway, today we're coming to you live from the warehouse in Grape and Grain in Yarraville, and as Joel has done the introductions, but a little about me. My name is Helen, and I love to brew. I love beer. I love being judging beer. And I also occasionally do demonstrations, and I work here at the store occasionally as well. Although this year it's been a little bit patchy, just given it's been a very strange year. As we've alluded to, I am brewing a Scotch Ale / wee heavy. It's sort of, as style-wise, there's sort of a little bit of I suppose labelling as such, and Scotch Ale wee heavy. In my own mind, I sort of think of as Scotch Ale sort of being a little bit lower ABV and crossing over into wee heavy. You've also got, I suppose, hanging around that sort of style mark is the old ale, and then you're sort of getting up into the American strong ales and the barley wines. So we're looking at something that's very malty, very rich, and as I've said, I was thinking ahead to winter, and every winter rolls around and I sit back and I go, why didn't I brew a beer to drink now, last winter, or at least in summer? And coming to the end of this year, it's like, what's a better thing to do than to actually do something wonderful to carry on into next year, and that's to brew a dark, roasty malt bomb to sip over winter. Now, this presentation today is geared towards the beginner brewer to the intermediate. I know that there's a lot of extremely talented, advanced home brewers out there, and this is probably, I don't know whether you'd get a lot out of it, but if you're tuning in, please stay tuned in. The thing about brewing is that there's always so much to learn, and never think you've learnt it all. And the science, I suppose, behind brewing, things keep getting revealed as well. So always keep an open mind, always keep learning, don't switch off. And the thing about brewing is that there's many ways to get from A to B, and I look at brewing as you have inputs and you have outputs, and then you have a process in the middle to transform it. So today, we're doing the Founders, my version of a Founders Dirty Bastard clone. Now, thing about Scotch ales is there's actually probably, I'll take that back. There's not a lot out there on the market at the moment, but some versions, when they pop up from time to time, have a little hint of smoke or peat to them. This is for me not necessarily my favourite flavour in this style of beer, and I'm not. This session today isn't specifically about this style of beer, but more about I suppose malty beers and how they age over time. But on this particular style, I've looked at a number of recipes, and some have just a little bit of a smoky or peated malt added, and sometimes it works for me, and sometimes it doesn't. My preference is to not use it. So today it actually isn't included in the malt bill. So in the malt bill for this beer, and just to tune in, we're brewing on the Guten, and it's how far into, I don't know. Can you see how far into the mash it is?
Let's see, my eyeballs.
Okay,
18 minutes in, I think. Is that 18 minutes in or 18 to go?
It's got 18 minutes to go. So using this is the shop Guten today, and we had a little bit of a problem because I was going to use my own Guten, which is 50 litres, and we're going to do things a little bit differently because the size of a malt bill is actually pushing the capacity of this particular vessel.
It's full.
So it's full, and there's things that we can do when we're pushing the boundaries on some of these all-in-one vessels. So what I've done with this one today is I'm going to put in about 4 litres. I've pushed the water as high as I can with the amount of grain that I've actually got with the capacity of the machine. Once we'll sparge it with about 4 litres of water. If I don't get the amount of wort that I require, and all I'm trying to do today is actually fill up one of these cubes, what we'll do is we'll actually add some water when we go to ferment it to bring it up to the volume of wort that we want. I'll come back to, we'll talk about different brewing options available. So that's what we're brewing in, and we're definitely pushing the boundaries of it. So the malt build for this particular beer today, we've got just over 80% Marisota, which is a British pale ale malt. It's a little bit maltier than say something like a Gladfield's or any of the other base malts that are in the market. We're also using just coming back to that, it's just a really good malt. I absolutely love it, and I use it in most of my beers.
It's very versatile.
We're also using something called Special W, which is sort of like, if anyone's familiar with sort of like a Special B. And it's bringing some, raisins and sort of dark fruit character, and it brings a level of richness. Now it's coming in at 6%, so we're actually expecting something sort of, a little bit fruity. And we've got some carapils, which is going to improve the head retention and mouthfeel. We've got some Caramunic too, which is going to give it some nice caramel notes. We're using Simpson's Crystal Heritage, which is a crystal malt that doesn't actually it's not as cloying as some of the more traditional malts, and okay. I'm not a fan of some of my opinions here get very personal about what I want in a beer, but I find crystal malt very cloying and actually leaves a sort of a tingling mouth sensation when I have a beer that's got a lot of crystal in it. So if I find a recipe that calls for crystal, I tend to swap it out and use Heritage, which I find is a better option for me. And then we've just got a little bit of the Carafa Special 3, so something very, very dark, and it's just going to give a little bit of colour. Coming back, the Special W does give a colour as well, but this just gives hints of some coffee and some chocolate, and because it's been dehusked before it's been roasted, there should be no bitterness or astringency coming along with it. So that's a malt build today.
And if I just jump in there, did you find that recipe online? Is that available?
I found that recipe. I did what any good person would do, and that is enter it into a search engine. Then I started looking through. I was hoping a lot of sorry, this is just something to keep in mind. A lot of breweries are actually very supportive of home brewers, and home brewers wanting to replicate their recipes. And you'll often find that some breweries will actually have recipes on their website, so it's something to when you go looking for, I love this beer, I want to make a clone of it, is to actually go straight to the source. You can also email breweries. Sometimes they're helpful, sometimes they're not. That's perfectly okay. So this particular recipe, I looked around and I found a forum where they'd sort of thrown around some ingredients, and then quite a number of the people in this chat actually made this beer, and they were actually very happy with the outcome. And I looked at the recipe and I tweaked it a little bit just to suit the local ingredients that we have available, and also to things that I didn't like.
Yep, fair enough. As one does.
As one does. So I've taken something someone else has done and tweaked it, and hope, fingers crossed, we will end up with a very tasty tasty beer.
I'll try and see if I can put a link. I'll get the recipe off you at some point, and I'll upload it to a drive or something like that. And what we've got for hops is this type of beer is not about the hops. The hops is providing some bitterness to offset the sweetness of the malt, and to provide preserving character. And what we've got is we've got the classic East Coast. East Kent Goldings, which is traditional English hop, and it's a classic English variety, and spicy, floral, rounded flavour, aroma, and we're using Pearl, which is something it's come up a few times. I think when I was doing the Sierra Nevada Pale Ale clone, they actually have swapped to using Pearl in that particular beer, and it's a dual purpose German hop, spicy minty aroma. The mint scares me in a hop. Yes. Used in German lagers and wheat beers. It has a delicate floral fruit spice and mint notes. So these are no late additions. So we'll be doing, ideally, if I was doing this at home, I'd be doing this a little bit different. Or if I was doing it on the larger machine, I'll come back to that. But today we're doing a 60-minute mash, and we're doing a 60-minute boil, and 30 grams of Goldings is going in at the 60-minute mark. At the 40-minute mark, we'll be putting in 15 gram of Pearl, and then at the 20-minute mark, we'll be putting in 10 gram of Golding and 10 gram of Pearl, and that'll be it. That's the hop. So mostly for the bittering and maybe a little bit of antioxidant potential. Yeah,
and maybe you might get a little bit of, but given that we're going to be aging this, any aroma or flavour from the hop will definitely just dissipate during that time. Yep. So it's all about the malt. It's all about the malt. Now, in an ideal world, I would have had a larger brewing machine, and what I wanted to do, what I would do is probably a 90-minute to a 2-hour mash, just because I can. I can't do that here because it's a demonstration. I have limited time. I would then take off about 4 litres of the wort, and I would boil that separately and boil that down to about 600 to 700 mil of liquid, which I would put back into the boil about 10 minutes before we'll finish, just to give it a little bit more complexity, because this is a beer that we're building up to have. It's got a. I see this as it's a complex grain bill, and this beer is. Well, I'm hoping is quite complex and smooth. So, the taking some wort out and concentrating it actually will give a little bit more complexity and concentration of flavour. If I was doing this at home, I'd probably do excuse my voice, do a 90 minute to maybe 2 hour boil as well, just to get that. That really sort of deep, complex flavour out of it. So it's sort of, I suppose it's like if you're, at home and you're making a casserole or a stew, and you can actually, sort of lightly fry up the onion, the carrot and the celery, and get that all soft and the onion clear. Or you could just throw it all in and just not even bother doing that. And having done it both ways, you get a little bit more complexity from taking the extra time. And that's with this particular beer, you'd get a little bit more out of it. Would it be discernible? I don't know. I haven't checked if a group of people like the Brewlosophy crowd have actually done some
experiments.
Some testing about going those extra steps. Do they actually bring anything to the end anything discernible to the end product? So this is what we're doing today on the Guten.
Now I'll just jump in there just to for those of you who have just joined, welcome. I see we've got a few more visitors popped in, a few more viewers. Just to address the fact that we're having some technical issues today. I feel so bad. I'm so sorry, Helen, that this is the second time during a stream of yours we've had a similar issue, but we're filming in the warehouse today.
I have the Midas touch when it comes to technology this year. So.
I'm sure it's not you, but we've got some spotty Wi-Fi. We are filming out in the warehouse. Because we're brewing on our Braumeister brewery, brewing some fresh wort kits, and the area we normally film in is occupied, occupado. So anyway, that's so for those of you who the vision's going to be a bit choppy. I think the sound is okay. We're going to forge ahead, and I hope you will all hang in there and still have a good show. So anyway, back to you, Helen.
Okay, so. Once this beer is brewed today, we don't actually do any. We don't cool the wort down. We actually do we just put it in a cube and do no chill. So coming back to the cube features in today's session. So basically, the hot wort will go straight into this particular cube. Now, once it's in the cube, if you can't fill the entire cube, just make sure that you actually, make sure that you've got every part of the cube coated. I will actually, before putting the wort in here, I'll actually sanitize the cube before I do that. Once the wort is in the cube, it lasts a very long time. If you're not sitting it out in sunlight, if you just got it in a dark place, wort can last in a cube for a year or more. So basically straight into the cube, depending on the ambient temperature, it could take up to 24 hours to cool down to about the 18 degrees when you might want to start fermenting. So we'll put this in the cube, we'll set it aside. At some point it will get fermented. And when we ferment, what are we going to ferment this wort with? We've got a number of options on the yeast, and the yeast in itself, requires I think it's just one of those never-ending, wide-ranging topics. But we've got options. So if you're in a situation where, so this goes for most multi beers or ales, pale ales, IPAs. Is you've got a number of dry yeast options available. For those of you who've tuned into one of my sessions or turned up at one of my demos, or just sat around a table drinking with me, you'll know that I love Nottingham Yeast. It is reliable, it is a workhorse, it doesn't ferment out as dry as something like a US-05. It leaves a little bit of a fruity character in the beer, and it's happy to work on a high ABV beer as well. So if I was in a part of Australia where I can't get to a homebrew store and I can't get some liquid yeast, for this particular Scotch Ale / wee heavy, I would use Nottingham, would be my go-to yeast. If you have access to some liquid yeast, I didn't actually write the names down, but I hope I remember. But Yeast 1728, which I do believe is a Scottish ale yeast.
Sounds about right.
Now it actually has the yeast, of course, for many beers is what the flavour is all about, and the 1728 brings a little bit of smokiness. So even though I haven't added any smoked malt to the malt bill for this particular beer, I'm going to get a little bit of that out of the 1728. I'm going to get a little bit of fruit, a little bit of spice, and we should all sort of settle out over time. Another option, actually, there's multiple options, but another option I considered if I was using liquid yeast for this particular beer is the London Ale 1028. Which will also, would be perfectly suitable for this Scotch Ale / wee heavy. There's no reason why you can't use US-05 or an ale. You don't use a Belgian. Well, maybe if you used a Belgian yeast, you might actually get a sort of a quad-like beer.
Yeah.
So, but you're definitely going to get a little bit of a different character out of the beer depending on the yeast that you actually use. So, so for this one, I do plan on using the Scottish Ale 1728. Once we've started fermenting it, then how long is it going to take? Now, I look at, I mentioned Nottingham. Nottingham works pretty fast, and you're going to, given that it's not actually a super high, it's not going to be a super high ABV beer, I expect that if I use Nottingham, I'm actually going to get it come down to probably around 1014. I'm actually expecting an opening gravity for this beer of around 1078, 1080. Yep. I'm not sure how it's going to go just because I've had to swap things around, but that's where I expect it will land. And I expect with Nottingham, I might get down to 1014. Maybe 1015. So that's the starting gravity and the finishing gravity. For the liquid yeast, it might actually not finish out quite as much, which is okay, because this beer, if it's finishing out around 1020, that's going to be perfectly fine. Now the beeping here tells me that we've finished the
dulcet tones of the
so
Guten.
Just excuse me as I just cut across the
so I guess you'll pick up, we can talk about yeast more in a bit, but it probably goes without saying you'll need to use a lot of yeast for this beer, would you say?
For this particular beer, I'd do a starter with liquid yeast. Basically, as soon as the yeast goes into the package, it starts losing viability. So it starts with a certain amount of cells, and as time goes on, those cells becomes less viable. if you've, but there's, you know, if it's sort of reaching its use by date or past it, do a starter.
Yep.
And I'm coming to that if your opening gravity is about 1055 or less, you probably don't need a starter, unless the yeast is quite old and you want to invigorate the yeast
Wake
cells.
it up a little bit.
When it comes to at this point, I would do I just do a 2 litre. I do a 2 litre starter for this particular one. If I wanted to build it up more, I'd feed that starter some more and get more viability. But I think a 2 litre starter with a slap pack, Wise slap pack would be adequate to do the job.
And we do have a show on that. Funnily enough, if you look back through our archives. We have a show on making starters for anyone who.
That was a
nice plug.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Now, this is. Yeah, we got that off. So this is just a little messy. Okay. So let's put this up. Just put this up here. Now, what we're going to do,
Yes. So
this is ideally, this would be sitting lower, or we would have a pulley system to actually pull this particular vessel up, because it's actually quite heavy and a little bit heavy for me. So Joel is going to be my pulley system for today.
Yep. Sorry, I just got to do a thing. Okay, so. Right there.
Yeah, have we got it? It's not going to slip.
So. Ooh, it is heavy.
Okay, twist. I think we've got it. Yep.
Oh, let's see that. Yes, there we go.
There we go.
Yep.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Joel. Good stuff. Okay, now just excuse me again. Walk in front of the camera. Okay. So, what we are going to do now is we're going to get this coming up to the boil, and I'm going to, in an ideal world, my sparge water would be a little warmer, but it's probably sitting around the 55 degrees. So, excuse me just whilst I get this going. Yeah, temp. Now, these particular machines can be programmed. I find it a little bit fiddly, and I don't have the patience all the time, and I get a little bit frustrated. So I generally just manually operate them, and I find that it works for me. So what we're going to do is just now, just in regards to the water, because I didn't touch on it, is Melbourne water I find is very good water, and the only treatment that I did today was add a Camden tablet to deal with the chlorination. So this water that I've got in here, I actually brought up to temperature in the vessel and just drained off, so it actually has the Camden tablet in it as well. Now, for those of you who tuned into my last demo, may remember that I actually had my first ever boil over. I need to just mention that to remind myself that this needs to actually come off before it hits the boil. Otherwise, it's going to boil over. So that's just a lesson, folks. Don't put the lid on, don't walk away, don't leave your mash pipe sitting on it, otherwise you'll get boil overs. And
it can happen to even experienced brewers.
It was my first ever boil over, and hope it will be my last, because they actually can be extremely dangerous. And as we may remember, there was something happened in New Zealand a few years ago, and there was some.
No, okay, I don't know the story.
But its brewing is relatively simple, but can be dangerous if you don't keep an eye on things that are happening. So boilovers, avoid them.
They're basically a molten sugar liquid spurting out the top. Well,
yeah, it's not good. You do not want to bet.
At best, it's a terrible mess. You have to clean up.
And there is the mess, and you don't want to clean it up. And I didn't like having to clean it up. So. Okay, so we were just talking about the yeast, and that for this particular beer, I'm going to use the Scotch Ale 1728. I'm going to do a 2 litre starter. How long is that going to actually take to ferment? I don't have any experience with this yeast. I'll be fermenting it around 18 to 20 degrees. Some yeast, as any experienced brewer will know, some yeast tends to stall at certain points. Some, is vigorous at the start and then just plods along to the very end. Coming back to, and I am a fangirl of Nottingham, coming back to Nottingham, pretty much it's usually done in a week. And I've never had a stall on it. So this particular yeast, I'm not quite sure how long it's going to take. And if you've got the capacity, something like this could take, if it was a higher ABV beer, some of these beers you really want to be leaving, for, not just 1 week, 2 week or 3 week, you might be even looking at 4 week for it to actually ferment out as far as it possibly can. Because sometimes I don't have something sexy like a tilt hydrometer. I don't have any sexy equipment. I basically drain off samples of beer and put it in my hydrometer tube, and so I'm tasting my beer all the time. I basically, from the time it goes into the fermenter to the time it's kegged or bottled, it's just a constant taste to see what's actually happening. So it could take. What you sometimes see is that over a week, if you've got something that seems to have stalled, it's actually micro-moving. It's moving very, very slowly. And so sometimes it's difficult to see if you've got a stalled fermentation, or if the yeast is just plodding its way to the very end. Once it's finished fermenting, I would recommend, if you possibly can, cold crash your beer. It doesn't matter if it's a dark beer, it doesn't matter if it's a light beer.
Any beer.
Just any beer, cold crash it. And if you want to see the effect of cold crashing, after you've done your hydrometer reading, don't drink it, which is what I normally do. Don't drink it. Put it in a glass, put it in the fridge, and or put it in a vessel, whatever suits you. And what you'll see is, even if it's a dark beer, you'll see the sediment that actually comes out of suspension and settles at the bottom of the glass. Any beer will benefit from cold crashing. I understand that not all of us have 4 fridges sitting in their house.
So you need a fridge. So just for a quick primer for anyone who's not familiar with the term, basically you're just putting your beer in it while it's still in the fermenter, in a fridge, and just leave it. Just turn the fridge on and getting it as cold as you can. Is that right? As cold as you can. Yep.
Minimum of 2 days. You can do it longer. Some people sort of worry about the the airlock sucking. So I use plastic fermenters, people, just I don't have anything sexy like stainless steel. I don't even have the Fermentosaurus or the newer style fermenters. So I'm just using the basic old style fermenter. So some people worry about oxygen being sucked back in. My husband also brews. It is. He's not watching. It's an unhappy alliance sometimes. But he's mucked around with putting balloons and stuff on it. And I just don't bother, because that's another thing. In case you haven't attended one of my sessions before, I'm the laziest brewer in the world.
I'm pretty lazy too.
If I don't have to do something, I won't do it. Although if you just listen to all these things I said I would do to get complexity into this beer, there's some things that I just don't do. So cold crashing it, minimum of 2 days. You can do.
Sorry everyone, I'm just getting some glitches on my end, so I hope everything is still okay out there. Let me know. Anyway, as you were, Helen.
Sorry, I must keep an eye on this. There we are. Okay, so. Joel, we might go to a break soon because I need to get a container to put the grain in, because it was the one thing that I think it's the one thing I didn't think about to bring around. We normally have lots of equipment in our other spots, so I don't have to really think ahead too much. Cold crash. I think I've said it about 10 times now.
Yep.
Do it. If you possibly can, do it. Once you've cold crashed it, then it's time to remove it to your keg. Or 2 bottles. And you hear that most people who start brewing start out on bottles because you don't have to invest too much equipment, too much in equipment to bottle a beer. But at some point, most brewers will go to kegging, because bottling is an arduous task.
Yeah, it's kind of a rite of passage in a way, isn't it? But once you start kegging,
well, it's
you don't look back, really.
We still bottle because I find that I drink. This sounds really bad, but I drink too much. If it's in the keg, I drink the keg really quickly. If I put it into a bottle, it's almost like an effort that I have to open a bottle, which makes no sense whatsoever. But beer lasts longer in bottles in our house, but we actually counter pressure fill bottles from the keg. But if you are bottling, there's a number of ways to carbonate your beer, and you can use carbonation caps, the tablets. Carbonation drops, sort of sugar rocks.
Drops, basically.
And what I was doing before we went to the kegging was I was doing the bulk priming. So I would I would find a calculator online. I would plug in the information on my beer, how many litres I've got, and how much, what priming material I'd be using, like DME or sugar, and then it would tell me how much I would need to carbonate that much beer, and then I would rack my beer from my primary fermenter into a secondary fermenter, just give it a little mix around, and then I would bottle from there. And within 2 weeks you've got hopefully within 2 weeks you've got carbonated beer. Issues with that particular method, if you're looking at if you've got a higher ABV beer, your carbonation is going to come from the residual yeast that you've actually still got in that's in the beer, and cold crashing doesn't get rid of all that, so you've got no problems that you won't have enough little yeasties to actually carbonate your beer if you're carbonating in the bottle. We're talking about that some big high ABV beers take a long time to ferment out. Often they've exhausted every bit of yeast that's available to them. And this is, I've had, and you'd think I'd learn eventually, but no, I didn't. Some really high ABV beers that did not carbonate in the bottle because there wasn't enough yeast, and even though I'd put in plenty of sugary material for the yeast to have a crack at, there wasn't any yeast to crack at it.
Just gave up.
So not only did I not have carbonation, I had extra sweetness that I didn't actually want. So sometimes what you need to do is, if it's a big beer and it's been sitting there for quite a while, is you actually add a little bit of yeast to each bottle. Now there's a number of techniques you can use. That's something if this is an issue that you've had, or something that you might be facing, just do an internet search on it. There's a number of techniques. You can put little grains in. You can make a little there's starter and do stuff.
It's usually a bit of fiddling you've got to do.
It actually is fiddly, and I just don't do it anymore because we just put it into the keg. So so it's not a problem. I've had to, since my last uncarbonated Russian Imperial Stout, we haven't had a problem. But I think we'll take a break right now for. I don't know what's the time, Joel?
It is, that's a good question. It's about 11:15.
11:15. We'll take a 10-minute break.
All right.
So I just need to go and do some stuff.
Got it, yep.
And we'll be back at 10:55.
10:55, yep. I'll put a timer up on the stream so people can get a gauge when we'll be back. We'll see you all in a bit.
Cheers. But this beer, what's it going to taste like once it's been fermented? I expect we're going to have a little bit of present alcohol warmth. I expect that it's going to taste okay, but sort of not quite right, not quite integrated. So you wonder, well, why would you sort of let it sit until winter? We'll come back to that particular point.
Foreshadowing there.
So what's actually going to happen, but you could be aging your. I think we've all heard of the term cellaring beer. We talk about bottle conditioning, and I think the bottle conditioning is one of those terms that can be sort of have a few different meanings depending on the context, and most of us tend to use it as a term for getting carbonation into the bottle. But today we're talking about actually conditioning the beer itself,
right. So
and you can
beyond
and you can leave it in the bottle for a very, very long time. You can leave it in the keg for a very long time if you've got the keg space. A lot of people are very lucky and have barrels. And I know of a lot of home brewers around Melbourne who have a barrel or two or three in their house. And in our house we have we have a few.
Really?
A few barrels.
So oak barrels, basically, like old wine barrels, or are they
because of course we don't have room for big barrels. I was just looking. There was a barrel somewhere here just before,
one on the other side of
one on the other side there. But no, I'm talking like little barrels that are suitable for a home. If you don't want to have to try and fill a large barrel.
They do hold a lot.
That's a whole lot. So I do know of homebrew clubs where they have one large barrel, and the club members will actually brew a beer to actually go into that barrel, and then at some point they get beer from that barrel, which I think is a great idea. But ideally, a home brewer's got something like a 20 litre barrel. So there's lots of ways that you can actually store your beer. I wouldn't recommend this, but I do know of a particular home brewer comes to mind where
shall we name?
Well, no, just leave put the beer in the secondary fermenter and just leave it, and had some sort of success. I don't recommend that. But then, how are you going to store this beer? Because beer storage is a little bit of a. Just excuse me. I just. Checking where we're at here. 93. So we're not too far away. Never store your beer in the light, people, ever. It's just not good for it. Don't.
Unless you like Corona.
Well, I mean,
it's a whole other story.
That's a whole other and and you did bring up the C word. I just can't believe you went there.
I'm sorry.
Joel.
Right. I meant the drink, of course.
But some actually sour beers deliberately use green bottles because there's some interaction between the light and the beer and the yeast. For the purposes of what we're talking about today, which is malt bombs, big ABV, anything over sort of 7% ABV. We're wanting a barrel, a keg, dark glass. If it's in glass, we want it in a fridge, we want it in a cupboard, and we want it dark. You don't. Ideally, in an ideal world, you would have a temperature-controlled environment, and you would be storing your beer between 10 and 15 degrees.
Yep.
Most of us don't live in this world where we can have that sort of temperature control.
Yeah, and cellars aren't really a big thing in Australia.
And cellars aren't a big thing in Australia. So I know we've attempted to do it, but you get variation, and I suppose what you want to do, if possible, is to limit that variation. And we're actually just specifically talking about homebrew here, but if we actually jump over into the commercial space, when you get a beer and you go, I'm going to sell this beer, this is the annual release of this, amazing Russian Imperial Stout, and I'm going to drink one now, and I'm going to put one in my beer cellar. By the time you get that beer, be honest, you don't know how it's been treated.
No, true.
You don't know if it's sat out in the sun on a pallet. You don't know if it's sat in someone's warehouse with no temperature control.
Yeah, they get pretty warm too, those warehouses. I speak from.
So it's very unusual for any of us, regardless of whether we're home brewers or people. Now we've got some little noise here. I'm just going to check what's actually happening. Okay, so we've actually reached boiling supposedly, and it smells really, really good. What we're going to do here on this particular one, we're just going to bring the down a little bit. I'll just bring that down. Cool.
You basically just switch it to manual at this point, do you?
Yeah, I've just got it on manual. I was just bringing the wattage down, and we'll see if that's okay for what that is. If it's not actually doing what I want, I'll turn it back up again. So we have no control over beer that we're actually buying commercially, and there's nothing worse than when you get a beer and you've tasted that, and this is I have sampled a lot of beers over the years, and so true story is that I've drunk a beer from someone's cellar and it's been absolutely amazing, and I've decided, I think it was just a little bit on the, that it probably needs to be drunk now, and I've grabbed one from my own, and it's like, this is no good.
Yeah,
it's not the same beer, and I have to look at that. If something's come out of the same batch, you have to look at how it's been treated over its lifetime. And so ideally, as home brewers, we would be able to cool store our beer. The reality is most of us can't.
Yeah,
if we can actually keep temperature fluctuations to a minimum, that's a good thing. A cooler environment is an even better thing. Another thing that I never do with your beer, if you can avoid it, don't lay your beer down. Always store it standing up. You minimise the oxygen that's available. So when it's laying down, it's got more of a surface area.
So that air pocket will sit.
Yeah.
Along
so it's sitting along. So it's actually exposed to a lot more beer than when it's actually standing up.
Yep. So
I'm just checking this because it's very. Just excuse me. Yes, that's smelling delicious.
Yep,
It's a little bit vigorous at the moment. I don't have enough wort for it to be this vigorous. So yeah, at the point where it's at now, I'd have a much higher boil off rate. So that's a thing to learn when you whatever of the equipment that you're using is dialing in what's actually happening with your equipment and getting a handle on it. And people get very fixated on numbers that they have to hit, and they're all good and well, but sometimes it's a little bit, if you haven't got it dialed in as to what's actually happening with your particular equipment, it can take a little bit. You can sort of under or over hit the mark sometimes. So this particular, because I, as we already know, it's not exactly ideal. I probably don't want a super vigorous boil. I'm willing to top it up with water if I need to. If I need to dilute it a little bit. So that actually is looking really, really good. We've done our first edition of the hops, which is the 30 grams of Goldings. So yeah, don't lay your beer down. Always stand it up if you possibly can. There's another, when I was doing a little bit of research about this, and that is the sort of movement. And I don't know, this might be just one of those pie in the sky things, but movement, and this comes to, I suppose, back to talking about, you know, how a beer is treated before you actually buy a commercial beer. And I suppose an extreme example of that would be movement, would be shaking a beer is not going to be good for beer. So if you look at that, actually what we're saying here is you just need to go to a brewery and drink the beer right there, and or drink your homebrew at home, and everything is going to be okay. Just stay away from the light, people. So just in regards to the storage environment, which is something I think we overlook in a lot of the talk about home brewing, is keep it away from the light, keep the temperature as constant as you possibly can. Don't lay the beer down, and yeah, it's
just do your best with what you got.
Do the best with what you've got.
A cellar, by all means, use it. But yeah.
Well, so cellaring is a little bit it's an interesting thing. We'll get to a little bit further along, but we've been sort of talking about beers for winter, and I'm excluding sour beers from our discussions today because that's worthy of that's a whole other ball game. So we're looking at beers that we might want to be brewing at the end of winter, spring into summer, so that we can be drinking for the next autumn winter period. And the sort of beers that will benefit from sitting for a little bit, you're looking at that really, you want something above 7%. I'm not saying that anything lower is not going to age well, but they don't have enough character to, once you have the hops drop out, a lot of lower ABV beers don't actually have, they don't have enough interest.
Yeah, right. Don't have the legs to go the distance.
I'm going to throw out words like insipid and flabby and lacking charisma. Yes, people.
Than a beer that lacks
beer
charisma.
has charisma. It's a strange thing when you're when you're drinking a beer and you go, well, there's no real actual fault to it, but it's just it's just like it needs a little bit of charisma. It needs a little bit of it needs a little bit of a polish. So we're excluding sours from today's talk, but you're looking at that. Ideally, beers over 7%. You want strong flavour, you want a solid malt profile. You're looking at beers like imperial stouts, large porters, and we're not here to discuss what the difference between a stout, an imperial stout, a porter or a Baltic porter is, because that's just that's falling down falling down a rabbit hole. Things like barley wines, wheat wines. I'm going to throw in a Belgian quad,
sure.
Because we'll come back to when we were just talking about yeast for this particular beer. Strong malty lagers like Doppelbocks, Bier de Gardes, American strong ales, old ales, Scotch ales, wee heavies. These are the sorts of beers when I'm conjuring up. I'm not talking pumpkin ales. We're not in. I don't. That's an American thing that they actually sort of brew for around, coming up into their harvest season. They do pumpkin beers.
It becomes pumpkin spice all day.
So we're looking at just really big big malty beers, and they don't have to be high ABV. And just because in our house, you know, a session beer is 8%, it doesn't mean that that's the same in everyone's house. And sometimes you just want to open a beer and enjoy it and not overthink it. And this is not the session for you if this is the sort of beer that you're thinking of right now, which is actually what I'm thinking of. When I leave here today, I will go home and I'll have an IPA. But in winter, just that, you want that, it's almost like giving your insides a hug.
Yes, warm, winter warmers.
A winter warmer, and as my old Dal used to say, you know, you want something that's going to warm the cockles of your heart.
Yep.
That's just a weird saying, but that's what he used to say. So you're looking at those really sort of big beers, and so they don't have to be high ABV, and sometimes that's, you know, that becomes a struggle because you look at a bottle and you go, well, I can't open that because I can't drink it all on my own. So I think something like what we're brewing here today is that little bit of the that compromise between that really big ABV and just that little bit more. And what we're going to get out of it, you're going to get a really nice big mouthfeel. And as looking at the malt bill on it, there's a number of those components that have been added that are actually going to contribute to that fulsome feeling in the mouth. Now, when we're brewing the big beers, I've alluded to some things that I would do when brewing a big beer, and depending on the size of your vessel and actually the size of batch you're doing. Because if you've got a vessel around this size, or you've got you've got an urn, or you've got a pot that you're using for brew in a bag, or you've got some sexy, you know, whatever sexy 3-vessel system, whatever you've got on the go, is that sometimes these bigger beers will actually stretch a capacity, and you know you've got a number of ways to bring out the best in these types of beers without creating I suppose a mess. And almost had one here today where I really did push the amount of grain I could get into this particular vessel. You missed all that. You took photos, didn't you?
I took a bit of footage. I'll try and splice it in later.
Yeah, it was a little bit obscene. So there's ways that you can go about this and getting some really good flavour into a beer. Now, I've got 6 grains in this malt bill, and it doesn't have to be that complex. It really doesn't. But I just feel that you get a little bit more out of it, but you don't have to make it this complex. And there's things, if you're not using a super complex grain bill, or you might just be using whatever grain you've got at home. I mean, I'm lucky here that you know, I've got access to, you know, I just decide, you know, 2 days ago, this is the recipe I'm going to do. You know, I can. You know, I've got all the specialty grains available. Often, if you're not based in a city or a town, near a town that has a homebrew store, sometimes it's just you have to wait. You have to either go for a long drive or get it actually delivered. So you might often just be working with what you've actually got on hand, but there's things you can do to bring complexity to even simple malt bills. And so some of the things that you can actually do outside of a complex malt bill is you can add things like dark candy sugars, or brown sugar, golden syrup, molasses. A customer who comes into Grape and Grain occasionally, a very, very interesting fellow, and he came to one of my early demos, and it's always a little bit disconcerting when you definitely know that the person standing there actually knows more than what you do about what you're actually doing. But he was telling me about he was telling me about a Belgian quad that he'd made, and he used pomegranate molasses. So there's lots of additional things that you can add, and these sorts of additions you'd be looking at adding at probably 10 minutes before the boil finishes, to sort of bring some complexity without having to, have some complex grain. You can do the long mash, the long boil. If you have and essentially if any of us, you make stock at home, or you're making a pot of spaghetti bolognese sauce or a stew, is that the longer you cook it, the more intense the flavours become. And that's the same with beer, because essentially we're just cooking up some beer here. So the longer the boil, the more intense the wort is actually going to become. If you have problems with the capacity of your vessel, you can do the whole, the double mash. And that is where you split your grain in. So I've done this a number of times on my old brew in a bag system, where, you split the grain into, you do one mash, you take the big tea bag of grain out, and then you put in a new tea bag of grain, and you do it straight into that already mashed water. And that's a really, really good way to do a massive beer in a smaller vessel. Other ways, you can steep the grains, or you can steep your dark grains, or even some of your specialty grains, off on the side. So 24 hours before you want to brew, you take a certain amount of. There's a little bit of calculation that you need to do, because of course you're going to lose liquid because the grain absorbs it. But basically, you steep your dark grains or your specialty grains for 24 hours, and then towards the end of a boil, you throw that liquid in.
Uh-huh.
That's actually coming back to looking at the aging of beers. This is a really, really good way to sidestep the acrid, astringent bitterness that comes out of some dark grains because of what happens during the roasting process. So earlier I mentioned that I'm using just a little hint of a dark grain called Carafa Special No. 3, and I mentioned that it was actually dehusked, and the dehusking actually removes that element that's actually going to give you that those astringent,
really
bitter, bitey elements. I don't want to get too off track, but age is something that actually helps those elements if you do have them in your beer. But to get a beer to be, to have a dark beer to be a little bit smoother and more drinkable, a little bit quicker, that's a really, really good way, steeping the grains off to the side, because you almost sort of fast forward a few months of aging by actually doing that. So I'm not sure if you've had any experience with doing that, Joel.
I've not. I don't think I've ever done it. I'm trying to think of the last time I brewed like a stout or a porter or something. I may have tried it once. But basically, what you're saying is you're cold. It's like a cold mash. You're not really mashing it, but a cold steep, as you say.
Yeah, well,
and you're saving those grains from going into the mash. You're saving a bit of room there, and I know lots of people who've done it, but not myself.
Well, I did it for the Australian National Homebrew Conference that we had in Melbourne in 2018. I did it with a Swartz beer, so for for Denny and Drew from Experimental Brewing, I was given actually a very good Swartz beer recipe, and that's what I did. Was I actually used one brew had the dark grains in the mash, and the other were steeped. The dark grains were steeped. The other version steeped on the side, and then the liquid added. And then there was a triangular taste testing done to see if people could actually pick up the difference. At different times, I liked different versions.
Okay,
so I think, but that was, I mean, admittedly that beer was around 4.5%. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it wasn't. I think.
Perceive a difference with them? Or
no, there was
definitely a difference.
Definitely a perceivable difference, but it was one of those differences where.
It wasn't better or worse, it was just
there was just a difference, and the preference was quite divided as to what the preference was, but it wasn't as most people were able to discern that there was a difference, but yeah, it was very divided. But it was my first introduction to that, you know, to the notion of that basically these roasted, dark roasted grains, they have no diastatic power left in them, so they're actually adding nothing. Other than flavour and colour. So they're adding no sugars. All sugars are gone. No sugars.
Yep. Just the roastiness, that coffee, chocolate
so that you're not actually losing anything from your mash.
Okay.
So
from leaving it out.
Yeah.
Okay.
So by leaving it out. There's another option that you can do, and I discussed. I was very. Lucky to have to just come back from holidays, and we visited a lot of breweries along the way. And I was talking to a brewer who were talking about an imperial stout, and a method that he used, which I hadn't actually considered, was not steeping the dark grains off to the side, but actually adding them to the mash in the last 20 minutes as another option. I've already discussed this particular option, and this would be good if you, I think especially good if your malt build wasn't particularly complex, is to take a portion of your wort once your mash is finished and boil it off on the side and leave. So if you were to, and again, you have to, I think this is, you need to be calculating your water properly so that you can have it, you can adjust for the end outcome is take about 4 litres, boil it down around to 600 mil, 700 mil, and then add that in the last 10 minutes. So essentially adding a concentrate into that wort. Once you've so I've been focusing here on the getting complexity into a malt bill at this point. The next step is obviously the fermentation, and you've got options in this space as well. So your choice of yeast, and your yeast will, depending on the yeast that you select, as we've discussed with this beer, is that your yeast will bring something to a party and will actually bring some complexity. When you're looking at a Belgian beer, if you're looking at the lighter, your Belgian pale, or your double, your triple, not that the double and triple are necessarily low ABV, but this is all about the yeast. When you're starting to get up into something like a Belgian quad, and I am throwing Belgian quad into this mix, is that you've got a lot of malt, and and of course the Belgian, whatever Belgian yeast you would select would actually bring a lot of complexity. So I look at this particular malt build that I've got here, and I think that I could throw any number of yeast, different styles of yeast at it, and I would get, I'm thinking of the Abbey yeast, I think would go really well with what we've got in the pot today. What else would you could definitely use like an ale yeast, like a US-05 or a 106 or a San Diego super yeast. I think it's just really, you looking at the yeast, and is that the sort of character you actually want in your beer?
And where do you want the beer to finish? You want it to be sweet, or not that it's going to be a dry beer?
Well, this one's not. I'll just, sorry, you've just mentioned something that I didn't actually touch on, and that's the mash temperature. The mash temperature, we haven't done any step mash. We've done nothing fancy. We didn't even raise the temperature up to 75 at the end and leave it for 10 minutes. It's just very basic. We've done it 66 degrees. 66 degrees. Yep. This is a middle of the road. We've got such well modified malt these days. I don't think you need to get too fixated on, if you see a recipe that says must be step mashed or you must do this. What we're doing today is going to produce a good beer. Yeah. Now, I probably I might revisit on this depending on how it comes out, is that if you mash in at a little bit lower temperature, you actually get a little bit of a drier beer, and if you mash in at a little bit of a higher temperature, you get a little bit more body and perceived sweetness in the beer. If you're doing a really low ABV beer, mash at a little bit of a higher temperature. I've gone for middle of the road, 66. You can't really go wrong with.
So it's usually sort of between 60 and 70, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so, and it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. So I do want a little bit of, given that I've actually got some sweet elements. I could have gone a little bit, probably 64, 65, but. I thought we'd try it at 66 and see how it actually goes, because I did swap out a component of the crystal that was in there for the Simpson's Heritage, which actually takes out some of that cloying sweetness. So we'll see how we go. But back to so your yeast for some beer is going to be the be all and end all, and we're not talking about hoppy beers. Hoppy beers. We're actually talking about malty beers, and what some of the yeast can actually bring some complexity to those beers. There's other really sexy things that you can do, and if you've got a barrel, that's a really great thing. Whilst we have barrels in our house, the unfortunate thing about a barrel is that often it ties up a beer for it's tied up for long periods of time. So a way to get oak character into a beer is you get yourself some oak staves, some oak chips, some spirals, some cubes, whatever your homebrew shop has. There are different varieties of wood out there. You've got toasted and untoasted. You can take these pieces of wood and you can soak them in. If you want to, you could soak it in vodka if you wanted to. Bourbon, your favourite whiskey. If you're wanting to impart a little bit of a peaty quality, you might have a peated whiskey. This is something that actually really does bring some complexity. I of course, like in most things with brewing, my way of learning is to make mistakes. So
it is a good way to learn. I found.
But it is a good way to learn, because I try not to repeat the mistakes, which usually it's hurting me towards being a reasonable brewer. But it really did. It was my first. It was back in the crazy days of 2014. It was my first Russian Imperial Stout, and I was going to barrel age it with some oak chips. It ended up tasting like I was sucking on a piece of wood.
Wood, yes, I've done that before. It was
extremely unpleasant, and I gave that beer. Actually, I still might have a bottle or two. I suppose it fits into what we're talking about today. I think
I know where you're headed.
It dissipated over time, but it was never ever went.
Oh really?
Away.
It was never quite got there. Okay.
It was never quite right after that. But so if you've got some chips, cubes, staves.
Staves are good.
I think there's some spiral things you get. Soak them in some bourbon or some whiskey, and you're sort of looking at maybe for just a standard batch of your 20-litre beer, probably about 15 grams of wood. Put it in something that you can retrieve, like a bag, a stocking, or something that you can actually get out of your beer.
Nylon bag.
Because you should taste test that beer to know when it's been sitting in there for an adequate amount of time. Don't walk away and just set and forget with this particular option, because you're going to. It could be a day or two away from. Yes.
Particularly with chips too, and I made
that's
that
a lot of surface area.
Yeah, you've got these little chips that really release a lot of oak flavour quickly.
They release it quickly. My ruined stout was using chips. I now use staves, which I find are much more stable.
That too,
so
staves are definitely a better way to go, and less is more to start with. You can always add more, later on.
Yeah, but you can't reverse it back. So another thing to do with some of these beers, and if I haven't actually even touched on a style like a brown ale, is to add some, towards the end of fermentation, or once fermentation is finished, is to add some coffee beans, some cold pressed coffee, coffee in some sort of form.
Any way you like.
I do like beans, and
you do get a different character, don't you, depending on if you use a bean or if you
it depends on
and
I think that nearly every demo I might have mentioned that I another mistake. I cheaped out on the coffee once.
Okay.
Don't cheap out on the coffee. And also do not leave the coffee, if you're using whole beans especially, don't leave it on the coffee for too long. So I've taken to adding it basically at the point of cold crashing, as I'll throw the beans in, I'll cold crash for a couple of days and I'm done. So I'm looking at two days.
Right.
I do know of a very good brewery in Melbourne that did a sour coffee beer, and
cool.
They spent actually months trialing different coffees, and when they added the coffee, so they added whole beans, they left it on for a very short period of time, because you're just getting the hint of the coffee rather than the beer. The beer wasn't about the coffee, but the coffee was present. Some of these things that you add, be very judicious with them, because as Joel said, it's easy to add more, but it's hard to take it back. Another option when it comes to the coffee is to add it at the time of kegging and bottling. Is to throw some in. So I did a brown ale recently, and I know I'm going off tangent a little bit. Sorry, people. I often do this. So I had a beer that hadn't turned out particularly well, and it was sort of like a sour Flanders type of beer. And we actually discussed this when I was doing a saison demonstration, and we talked about actually doing a saison. In the end, I actually did a brown ale for it, and I'd organised some grain milled August last year. And then it got put in the cupboard, and then I forgot about it. And then it's like, hey, I want a brown ale.
Yep.
I've got the grain. Yeah. Oh, but it's over, it's 15 months old, and it's been...
and milled.
But whoever did the milling did a very good job of actually, there wasn't much room left in the bag. So I thought, you know what, I'll give it a go.
Yep, why not? Yeah.
And so I put half of fermented it out using Nottingham, fermented this brown ale out, and I put half of it into my sour beer that wasn't quite right, and the rest of it I just threw in some cold pressed coffee. I did some experiments. I took small amounts of it and actually did experiments with the ratios about how much coffee to actually add into it. I can't tell that the grain is old, and I'd say it's a really good brown ale of coffee. I'm really surprisingly super pleased with it. Yeah. You can add coffee in the end. So we're talking. So to come back to this is a little bit rambling. We're talking about ways to add complexity to beers that we're actually aging.
And on the topic of coffee too, often we'll get customers asking, for advice on how to add coffee. There's no real one way to do it, as you just, I think, illustrated.
You can
there's
get
a whole
it
bunch
in
of different ways. Yeah. There's no right way, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
This is, I think I said it right up front, is that there's no rights, there's no wrongs, there's just different methods and different ways of doing things, and finding something that actually works for you.
Yeah, so experiment and play, I think that's the
experimental play,
methods.
And it's always good to get some advice, or read what other people have done. And when you take a look at how to get hops into a beer, and I do remember an article in the BYO magazine from a number of years back, and you're talking about tinctures and teas and just all sorts of things that are sort of outside of what you would normally consider. How you would actually add in hops. And talking of hops. For the sort of beers that we're talking about, these beers are not about the hops. hops are there to provide a. Sorry, just looking at the time. Yeah. Hops are there to provide a some bitterness, preservation qualities, but these beers aren't about the hops. And sometimes if you're wanting, I look at the example of something like an American barley wine, because, or even like an American brown ale. If you've inserted American in front of a beer, generally there's an expectation that they've probably that the beer has been not over hopped, but extensively hopped. And so this is my personal opinion, is that I like an American barley wine when it's fresh, but having tried to cellar and age a number of them, I don't think they cellar and age as well as an English barley wine, which is more about the malt. I just think that over time, hops are particularly volatile, and they just, as anyone knows, if you get a beer off the shelf and it's a little bit old, the hops have often the hops are faded, and what you're left with is something that actually isn't the best drinking beer. And we'll come back to words like insipid, flabby, just blah. And that's because the hops, they had one thing carrying the flavour, and that was the hops. And if hops are gone, then you don't have a lot. So these beers that we're talking about today, those ones that you want to enjoy in winter, those ones that you want to let sit age over time, they're not hoppy beers. The hops are just basically a support act for the malt, for the big malty notes. Now, there's also another issue when you're brewing these sorts of beers, and we sort of touched on it, and that is it's the middle of summer. You're wanting to brew IPAs, pale ales, XPAs, whatever it is that you want to brew, something that's actually going to move through quickly. Often these types of beers, as we alluded to earlier, is that the fermentation can take a while to get to the terminal end. And if you don't have room in your fermenter facilities, talk to your friends. We've got a friend who's not home brewing at the moment. He's got a fridge, and we're actually, even though we've got 4 fridges at our house, we're using his fridge as well. But that's to store beer, not to actually ferment beer. So it's share the love around. And if you've got a friend who's got a spare fridge, or they're going on holidays and you can stick your beer somewhere, it's always an option. Don't just go, I can't do this because of this limitation. But I do understand it's difficult for many home brewers, is that you don't have a lot of space, or you have people in the house who may not be quite on board with your hobby, that's taking up lots of time and space in garages and rooms and fridges. But the big thing that these beers need is that they just need some time. And so if you haven't already brewed your winter beer, you should really start thinking about it. Now, just excuse me for a moment. I am just going to, this is my fining agent that I actually use for brewing. So a lot of you would be using Irish moss, Werflock. I use this substance called Brew Bright. Just use whatever you've got, or don't use it. It's up to you. What this stuff does is it actually just it starts to, all the proteins and all the stuff that you don't want coming out into your cube get attracted and clumped together in when you do your whirlpool. So it's well worth using, but you don't have to use it. There's so many things in brewing where it's like, oh, I must do this, I must do that. I think it's a good idea to start actually cleansing your beer from this point onwards, and this is part of that cleaning it up. But if you haven't got any, you've run out, don't worry about it. So we've got that ready to go. So how much time is too long?
Well, I didn't want to interrupt you there, but you were going so well. I think we may have lost the feed.
Oh.
I was just, we're recording the tape.
I was on a roll
I
too.
know, that's why I didn't want to stop you. And so...
You need cards. Okay. Wait, I'm just trying to remember where I was up to. We needed time.
So you were talking about Brew Bright and so whatever.
Okay. So are we ready to go?
Yes.
Oh, we're
go for it. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just I'm recording, so I'm just going to keep doing stuff here.
Okay,
and,
we had a little, we had just a minor technology sort of some grief there, and
we're going to forge ahead.
We're no longer live, so we're just actually recording this. So just a little bit of an update on where things are at here, where. It's boiling away. We've had our last hop addition has been added. We've got 14 minutes left on the boil. At the 10-minute mark, I'll be adding the Brew Bright and some yeast nutrient, and then we're on the homewood stretch. But we've been talking about aging beers, and it's like, what happens? I think I've already mentioned that, you buy or you make a hoppy beer and you sort of reach a peak of flavour and then it just sort of, it dissipates. I found that commercial beer, hoppy beers in cans actually keeps a little bit more hop character than in the bottle, which, coming back to talking about storage of beer earlier, is, it's an interesting point to ponder. So what's actually really happening? And why do beers change over time? And it's all about science. Yes, science. Science is such a sexy word, and actually the whole brewing end to end, it's science. And when I started doing a little bit of research into what is happening when beers age, I came to the conclusion quickly that I do not have the knowledge to talk to the actual things that are happening in the bottle as a beer ages. What you've got is you've got some really volatile compounds that change over time, and just because you put them into a bottle or a keg or a barrel, they don't stop changing. They're not an inert substance. They keep evolving and changing. So what are the sorts of things that actually happen? So we mentioned hops, which is probably the most easiest thing for any beer drinker to see. If you like a hoppy beer, you know when you get one that's out of date or old, or you've got your homebrew, and you struggle. Something that we've struggled with at home as homebrewers is getting hop character into a beer and then keeping it in the beer. And we have had mixed success, and this is sometimes not how many hops you throw at a beer, but how you actually use the hops. But essentially, you know that the older the beer is, the less it doesn't taste as fresh. It's not as vibrant. The hops have started to drop away. It's really, and hops are really volatile. But also, what's volatile is yeast and malt. And what's happening, that alchemy that's happening when you throw all these components together and you throw it into a bottle and you let it sit, and what's happening. So coming back to the sort of beers we're talking about today, our winter beers, our winter warmers, these aren't hoppy beers. the hops are there just as a support act, and they're just there to provide some preservative quality and some bitterness. And they will continue to do that through the lifespan of this beer, year in, year out. But there's other things happening with the malt, and there's other things happening with the yeast. And there's one thing that might stand out to anyone who's salad beer, gone to a bottle share and had an older stout, or it might have even happened with some of your beer at home, is you might taste a stout when it's fresh and it's beautiful, it's vibrant. It might have been barrel aged, it's roast coffee, a little bit of ash, whatever elements you're picking up, and then you put the bottle away, and then you try it a couple of years later, and you're starting to get soy sauce, and Vegemite, and meaty characters, and that is a process called yeast autolysis, and essentially. Basically, the yeast has carked it and burst. So you're just eating dead yeast. The dead yeast is giving you. So that's a very, I suppose, dumbed down version of what's actually happening. But that's what's happening. So yeah, that beautiful stout that you'd stored now tastes like a soy sauce bomb.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is. And this is part of the aging process. Technically, if we're looking at brewing, if you're looking at, it's a winter one year and you're looking to brew, a beer for the next winter, or even at this point, yeast autolysis should not be an issue for that beer, because it's not sitting around long enough. But the longer it sits, the more likely you are to get that. The sorts of things that you get when the volatile compounds in your beer are like settling in and interacting and sort of giving each other a warm hug, and some things as we know, some things are sort of integrate and it all becomes warm and fuzzy, and others become smooth and delicious, and some other elements just become quite jarring. Coming back to my example of using oak chips and having over-oaked the Imperial Stout, that settled out over time, and that's an interaction with all the other compounds that were in the beer, but it never actually fixed the problem. You can have that bitterness may decrease, harshness, you've got harshness. I've got a little list here, so I'm just going to just read it off a little bit.
Go for it.
You've got fruity and floral esters, these things can increase or decrease. You've got, we'll come back to oxidation. You've got bready characters and sweetness and metallic, earthy, straw, wood, I can never say the word, Venus?
Oh yeah, Venus? Yes.
For winey type ones.
Winey.
These things can increase or decrease in the beer as it actually sits, and depending on what you've done, a lot of this is actually yeast driven, and you'll find that you will get these changes over time, and some beers just settle out. The jarring edges become almost smoothed out, and that's why you really want to be brewing your winter beers now, because you want those edges to be completely smoothed. So a couple of things that you don't want, that's a yeast autolysis, and the biggie, and this unfortunately it's a problem, and it's called oxidation. And it's you hear of terms like hot side oxidation, and which is actually at this point when I'm handling the beer when it's still warm, is that people get concerned about that. You get whenever you're transferring your beer, you want to minimize the exposure to oxygen. And you flush out kegs with CO2. When we're counter pressure filling bottles, we flush it out with CO2 so that we minimise the amount of oxygen, so we minimise the oxidation. When I was talking earlier about storing a beer, don't store it laying down, because you actually increase the surface area that the beers actually could be exposed to oxygen. Oxidation presents as wet paper, wet cardboard, mouldy carpet, That's a thing for me. Wet dog. There's
sherry kind of.
The sherry.
That's a good. I guess I'm getting that can be a positive thing.
I was highlighting the really rubbishy.
Go for the rubbish stuff.
The rubbish ones. Now, the sherry tends to be not because you've done a lot of exposure, but there's a little bit in the beer, and that sherry notes creep in over time. And in a barley wine, you never knock a sherry note.
So it can absolutely work. Yeah, I have found that oxidisation is probably for me being the biggest killer of all my beers, the biggest problem I have had through all my brewing.
We're a little bit slow on this because I was talking too much.
Yeah, the sherry notes are good in a barley wine or a really big beer, but sometimes I can detect them early on as well in a beer that has crystal in it.
They can
typically,
come,
and it just doesn't. It's usually not. It's not nice.
It's not particularly pleasant, and should be avoided at all cost. But as a natural, it's a natural byproduct of aging a beer.
Yeah.
And you will. Some degree of it, the sherry notes are really nice, but some degree of it can be acceptable. But yeah, I've had some beers in. I was aging some barley wines, and earlier this year I decided I was going to drink as many barley wines as I possibly could this year. I actually failed in that challenge, but so many reopened.
a tough challenge to set.
Well, what was really tough and sad was that they were oxidised.
Yeah.
And oxidised beyond drinking, drinkability.
Yeah, when they get to that point.
So yeah, how long is too long? It really comes down to the beer. It comes down to the conditions you can store the beer in. If you're brewing, this beer here, what am I going to do? Well, it's going to ferment. I'm going to taste it when it's fermenting because that's what I do. I'm going to keg it, and then I'm going to bottle it, and I'm going to taste it, and then ideally what I would do is, if it's not drinking absolutely amazing now, is I drink 1 bottle a month just to see how it's actually progressing. And that's a really good way to go about it, is don't set and forget it, is to see what's actually happening with it. And you might actually get to the point where you've let it actually go too far, and you go, well, where was the peak? Where was, that peak or plateau of drinkability? And you might actually have a very extended peak. You might actually even find that actually I didn't need any extended aging on it because there was no real discernible difference. I don't actually use any brewing software, but I do keep Excel spreadsheet of all of my brews. And one of the things that I do is every time, especially not to a point of where I've let it go and I'm just drink it. But if it's something that I'm putting aside for storage, I will actually take notes of if I'm discerning differences in it from the previous sample. I will also touch on I did do an experiment last year. I brewed a barley wine which wasn't that great. I put the hops through an IBU calculator, and I didn't put enough hops in it, and I didn't have enough bitterness. But I put a Russian Imperial Stout and a barley wine. I put samples in the cupboard, and I put samples in the fridge. And I haven't actually sampled the Russian Imperial Stout yet, but the barley wine was exhibiting more oxidation from the cupboard.
Well,
in the fridge, it was like the aging process had been slowed down.
Yep. That makes sense,
yeah. So I forgot to mention that earlier when we were talking about storage. So what does time not help? So we've got time. Time will do some amazing things to your beer, and then it will start doing horrible things to your beer. But what does time not help? If you've got a fermentation issue, time is not likely to help it. There is one that does stand out, and I know because I have done this. Acetaldehyde. If you leave the beer at at room temperature for a couple of months, the acetaldehyde will dissipate out of a beer.
Oh.
If it's in a keg, give it a swirl every now and then and just degas it.
Degas it, okay.
Degas it. In the bottle, obviously you can't do that, but leave it at a room temperature place. And I can't speak for a bottle because I've done it in the keg, but I have read that people have experienced the same in the bottle. So if you've got acetaldehyde, it's not a great thing. You don't want to be tasting. So that's a pear and apple sort of smell, and it is something's gone wrong during fermentation. And but it will dissipate. That's the only thing that. But if you've got other fermentation issues, now another thing which that comes out of brewing some of these bigger alcohol beers is fusel. So you get some sort of alcohol.
Oh, yes, of course, yeah, sure. So
now,
hot alcohol, hot.
Yeah.
Notes.
So some of that will actually, with age in a lot of beers, if it's fermented at the right temperature, will actually just dissipate and integrate over time. And some of it's not too bad. Yep. You don't want it sort of burning, but just a nice alcohol presence is very acceptable for me. But say, for example, and I just had a chat with a friend yesterday who had this happen, barley wine got up to 28 degrees, couldn't get it down, and it's never gone away. It's never improved. It's always
banana. I'm guessing banana flavors.
And fusel,
and
high alcohol.
Yeah, those alcohols. Yeah.
Infections. Yeah, that's not going to be fixed over time, and it might give you an exploding bomb. Lack of carbonation, if it's in the bottle, we touched on that earlier, is that, if you've got a high ABV beer and it's been, in the fermenter for a while, it's always prudent to just add a little bit more yeast when you're actually doing the bottling, because the carbonation's not just magically going to ever come back. And I have admittedly had my undercarb beer with my overcarb beer, and I've actually mixed them together to come up with a well-carbed beer.
That's a solution.
So those are things that time doesn't help. But I think that we've we've had a little bit of a wide-ranging conversation today. The brew is actually finished. What I'm going to do now is we're just going to give it a little bit of a whirlpool, and then we're going to just let it sit for about 20 minutes, and then we're going to cube it. So I'll just. Okay, that's done.
That's it.
That's it. So just to wrap up this session, it's basically what we've done is we've brewed a beer. It's going to be about 8.5%, and it's got a little bit of a complex malt bill. We haven't had exactly the most perfect. Perfect brew session, brew session today, but at least we didn't have a boil over.
Yes, we've dealt with a few technical issues, but the beer itself has gone swimmingly.
The beer has gone well, and I know that actually at the moment, I'm speaking to just the camera. We're not actually live. But now's the time to actually, if you've got the capacity, to start thinking about a beer that you might actually want to brew that you would enjoy in winter. And, there's plenty of options out there, and you don't have to go for something particularly big. Even just like a strong brown or, a good porter will actually benefit from actually sitting for a few months and just improving with age. There's lots of resources out there, and I would don't just sit in a silo. If you're part of a homebrew club, if you've got questions, reach out to them. Homebrew stores have really great people there to help you. We're at Grape and Grain in Yarraville. You can look online, BYO magazines, brewing classic styles for recipes, the classic how to brew. Just keep brewing. Keep an open mind, keep learning, keep sharing the love around, and happy festive season. And hopefully 2021 will be a little bit better than 2020.
Yeah, here's hoping.
Yeah. Cheers.
Oh, thanks, Helen. I'm sure you've inspired a lot of people out there to start thinking about some winter beers or approach their summer brewing a little differently. And to everyone who was watching the live show, apologies again, but also thank you for toughing it out for as long as you did. I'm going to take that live stream offline. So for those of you who are watching this right now, this is going to be the tape version, which will be a lot better. We were having some technical issues, so we just decided to roll with it, record the tape. I'll get this uploaded. Well, if you're watching this now, it's been uploaded. So there you go. But thank you, Helen. Thank you for toughing it out again yourself with our camera issues. And yeah, this is the last stream for the year. We'll see you next year. And everyone else, we're taking January off from streaming, I believe. We'll be back in Feb. So we looking forward to seeing everyone then.
Cheers.
Cool.